Adaptations are awesome. The reason that I wanted to do a video about adaptations is because of the Hunger Games, but I'm not going to talk a lot about that because everyone is talking about the Hunger Games. Like, everyone. What I want to talk about instead is sort of like the general idea of what you have to do as a consumer of an adaptation. The most important thing is that you have to allow the adaptation to exist in the media in which it was created. So, the Hunger Games movie, you have to judge as a film. Because it's never okay to judge a film as a novel. Because a film is not a novel. And there are all kinds of specific examples of things that movies have to do, that TV shows have to do, that comic books have to do, that novels have to do, that other media don't or can't. So if there are things that you love in a novel that don't translate well into a movie, that's not necessarily the producer's fault or the director's fault or the writer's fault or the actor's fault. It might just be the fault of the medium, and you've got to deal with that. That's your problem. But now that we're done with sort of my preaching element, I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite adaptations that I've read recently, and it is The Battle of Tull by Stephen King, sort of. Way back in the 1980s, a few years before I was born, Stephen King started writing about the gunslinger Roland and his adventures to try to find the Dark Tower. And it's sort of a big deal if you've never heard of the Dark Tower series, but it is entirely possible that you've not been living under a rock and you haven't heard about the comic book series that has been created in this universe. The first few volumes cover a lot of backstory, a lot of flashbacks that you see in The Wizard and Glass and in The Gunslinger. And I haven't really read those because I haven't read far enough into the series that I feel comfortable. But The Battle of Tull is basically the first story that we ever heard about the Gunslinger, and it's one that I've read in the novel, and one that I felt comfortable experiencing in a comic book form. One of the really super awesome things about this adaptation is that everyone involved seems to be really, really smart and have a really good feel for the source material. This is evidenced by a letter to the editor which prefaces this bound edition of The Battle of Tull. In it, the assistant editor says something that really matters and I want to share with you. He says, "The story we are telling here in our humble panels and balloons is not the exact same story that King told when he first published The Gunslinger 33 years ago. The characters, locations, and events are the same, but the most important part of the story is different. The telling." And this is great because the editor agrees wholeheartedly with everything that I feel about adaptations. The Battle of Tull is not better or worse than the description of the Battle of Tull in The Gunslinger. It's different, and it's awesome, and The Gunslinger is awesome, and they can both be awesome and they can both feed off each other. So in closing, just please do me a favor and don't judge a film as if it were a novel, because that's not fair. Don't judge a novel as if it were a film, because that's not fair. Don't judge a television series as if it were a film or a novel, because that's not fair. Don't judge a cover song as if it were the original, because that's not fair. Basically, just be fair to the medium and to the creators and the creative people that are involved in things. And if the creators, as with the Dark Tower's comic books, if the creators have an eye on the source material and they really understand it and they really value it, that will come through in the adaptation. If they do not, that will also come through in the adaptation. And it'll probably suck. But I don't like to talk about things that suck, so I'm not going to give you any examples of bad adaptations, because you can probably find those on your own. Instead, I'm probably going to talk about more adaptations in the future, Sherlock being one of them. And you are going to be fair because I told you to. I'm going to see you later. Mutually exclusive.